Imagine spending a fortune on the most beautiful dress you have ever worn. The color is extraordinary. A rich, jewel-like emerald green, the kind of green that practically glows under candlelight. The kind of green that makes every other woman in the room turn and stare. You wear it to the most important event of your life, and it kills you. Not quickly, not obviously, slowly, invisibly. A rash first, where the fabric touches your skin. Then sores that won't heal. Then dizziness. Then your organs begin to fail. And by the time anyone connects your death to the dress hanging in your wardrobe, it is far too late. This was not a rare accident. This was not an isolated tragedy. This was Victorian Britain's most fashionable colour, and the people who made it knew exactly what they were selling. You need to understand what green meant to the Victorian world. Before the Industrial Revolution, producing a vivid, saturated green dye was almost impossible. Natural dyes faded. They were inconsistent. Expert dyers could achieve brilliant results by layering blue and yellow, but the colour would never hold. Within months, sometimes weeks, your expensive green gown had become something dull and indeterminate. Then, in 1775, a Swedish chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheurer discovered something that changed fashion forever. A compound that produced a green so bright, so bold, so perfectly jewel-like that nothing in the natural world could match it. A green that did not fade. A green that glowed under candlelight in a way that made the woman wearing it look like she had been lit from within. The colour was called Scheele's green. Later it became known as Paris green. Then emerald green. The name kept changing because the product kept improving. Each new formulation more vivid, more brilliant, more irresistible than the last. Victorian Britain fell completely in love with it. Wallpapers, carpets, curtains, candles, children's toys, sweets, and above all, clothing, dresses, gloves, shoes, and the elaborate artificial flower wreaths that fashionable women wore, pinned to their hair and pinned to their gowns at every ball, every dinner, every wedding. By the mid-19th century, the country was, as one historian put it, bathed in green. And here is the detail that nobody who was buying these things wanted to hear. Scheuer's green was made with arsenic, specifically copper arsenite, a compound containing arsenic trioxide, one of the most potent poisons known to the ancient world. The same substance that had been used to murder emperors and poison rivals for centuries. Now, woven into the fabric of the most fashionable dress in the room, is what arsenic exposure does to a human body, because the Victorian fashion press preferred not to explain this clearly. In high doses, arsenic kills quickly. In the lower doses delivered by prolonged contact with arsenic-dyed fabric, the process is considerably slower and considerably more unpleasant. First, the skin. Arsenic is what Victorian doctors called an escharotic, a substance that produces a caustic effect on skin, causing sores, scabs, and the progressive destruction of tissue. Women who wore arsenic-dyed green gloves developed ulcerations around their fingernails. Those who wore green gowns found rashes and sores appearing wherever the fabric made sustained contact with skin. The warmer the skin, the faster the fabric released its poison. Then the systemic effects. Dizziness, fatigue, nausea, headaches, easily dismissed as stress, or the effects of a tight corset, or simply the demands of the social season. Then organ damage. The liver, the kidneys, the blood. Arsenic attacks the production of red and white blood cells, creating fatigue, increasing vulnerability to infection. And then, insufficient exposure, death. Now here is the number that should end the story immediately, but somehow didn't. It was estimated that a single ball gown dyed with Scheele's green contained approximately 900 grams of arsenic. It takes 5 grams of arsenic to kill an adult. One dress contained 180 times the lethal dose. The women wearing these gowns were, in most cases, protected by layers of petticoats and linings that reduced direct skin contact. But the arsenic didn't only work through touch. Every movement of the skirt, every swish across a ballroom floor, every sweep through a doorway, released particles of arsenic into the air. The woman wearing the dress breathed it. The people dancing near her breathed it. The servants who brushed and stored the gown breathed it. The British Medical Journal noted, not entirely without dark humour, that a woman in an arsenic green dress was, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, carrying enough poison to kill every admirer she encountered across an entire evening's worth of ballrooms. The women who wore these dresses were in danger, but the people who died were the ones who made them. On the 20th of November, 1861, a 19-year-old artificial flower maker named Matilda Scheurer died of arsenic poisoning in London. Her job was to dust artificial flowers with arsenic-laced green powder, the decorative wreaths that fashionable women wore pinned to their hair and their gowns at every important social occasion. She inhaled it every day. For months, according to contemporary reports, at the end she vomited green. The whites of her eyes had turned green. Before she died, she told the people with her that everything she looked at was green. She was 19 years old, and she was not the only one. The flower-making industry employed thousands of young women in exactly the same conditions. Medical examinations of workers in the trade documented hands covered in ulcers, nails destroyed, faces marked by open sores. Workers described the green powder settling on every surface of the workshop, on their food, in their lungs, on their skin. The people making the most fashionable accessory in Victorian Britain were being systematically destroyed by it. And doctors knew this was happening. As early as 1857, 4 years before Matilda Scheurer died, doctors were publicly describing what they called a great deal of slow poisoning going on in Great Britain. The dangers of arsenic dyes had been documented. The evidence was available. The connection between the green dye and the deaths and illnesses of the workers producing it was not in dispute among medical professionals. The manufacturers kept making it, the fashion industry kept selling it, and the consumers kept buying it because green was fashionable, and in Victorian Britain, being fashionable was worth dying for. Or more precisely, worth letting someone else die for. Here is where the story turns from tragedy into something more calculated. The deaths and illnesses caused by arsenic dye were not a secret. They were reported in newspapers, discussed in medical journals, illustrated in popular magazines. One famous print showed skeletons dancing in green gowns at a ball, a joke about fashion that was also a direct report of what was happening. The satirical magazine Punch wrote in 1862, "A ball will be as deadly and destructive as a cannonball, and nearly everyone who dances will be food for powder." The Times of London, reporting on arsenic poisoning spread through a pair of socks, asked, "What manufactured article in these days of high-pressure civilization can possibly be trusted?" The information was public. The danger was documented. And yet it took until 1895, 34 years after Matilda Scheurer died, for the British government to regulate the use of arsenic in clothing. 34 years. France and Germany had already passed legislation. Britain lagged behind, in part because of persistent lobbying from manufacturers who insisted the dye was safe, in part because the people dying most severely were not the wealthy women in the gowns. They were the workers, young women, poor women, women whose deaths were noted in medical journals and largely forgotten everywhere else. The class divide in this story is impossible to ignore. The wealthy women wearing the gowns faced real but limited risk, protected by layers of fabric, rarely in direct contact with the dye, unlikely to experience the worst effects of sustained arsenic exposure. The 19-year-old workers breathing green powder every day in poorly ventilated workshops faced a different calculation entirely. And the system that protected the gowns continued precisely because the people suffering most from them were the ones with the least power to stop it. The arsenic dress seems like a relic, something so obviously dangerous, so clearly documented, so thoroughly a product of a less informed age that it cannot possibly tell us anything about right now. But consider this. The book Fashion Victims by historian Alison Matthews David, the definitive academic work on the dangers of Victorian dress, ends not with Victorian Britain, but with the present day. In 2009, Turkey banned sandblasting, the process of spraying denim with sand to give jeans a fashionable, distressed look, because workers were developing silicosis, sand in the lungs, an incurable disease. When Turkey banned it, production didn't stop. It moved to countries where the regulations were weaker, where the workers had less power, where the deaths would be noted in medical journals and largely forgotten everywhere else. The arsenic didn't disappear from fashion. It changed its name. The workers making the most desirable clothes in the world are still, in 2024, dying to produce them. The consumers buying those clothes still largely prefer not to think about it. The manufacturers still lobby against regulation. The fashion press still covers the gowns and not the workshops. The only thing that genuinely changed between Victorian Britain and now is the colour of the poison, and the name of the country where the workers live. Matilda Scheurer was 19 years old. She died turning the whites of her eyes green, vomiting the colour that the wealthiest women in Britain had decided was the most beautiful shade of the season. 34 years later, the British government regulated the dye. The women who wore the gowns had largely moved on to other colours by then, because fashion had changed, not because the danger had finally become unacceptable. The dress didn't kill the bride wearing it as often as it killed the girl who made it. And that distinction between who bears the cost of fashion and who enjoys its benefits is a line that has never really moved. On this channel we find the objects that everyone handles without thinking, and we show you what was built into them, and who paid for it, before you ever touched them. Yesterday we looked at the conspiracy stitched into every shirt you own. Next, we're going somewhere that will make you look differently at something in almost every room of your house, something the Victorians put on their walls, something that was making entire families sick for decades, something manufacturers knew about, something they called beautiful. Subscribe. Because that one is considerably darker than this.